Hi y'all, my name is Elise. As you can probably tell, our beloved host Jack is out for this episode, so I'll be filling in just for this one. My name is Elise Faith. I am 16 and a rising senior in Tampa, Florida. I've been writing for the podcast for the past year, so pretty much since we started. And while I've been behind the scenes, I've covered the DNC as well as the RNC, among a number of other things that you may remember from our episodes. I'm super excited to be hosting today because I have our guest Sophie Sandberg on for this week. Sophie is the founder and the leader of the Instagram account Catcalls of NYC and the organization Chalk Back, which both aim to raise awareness for and stop street harassment. I personally am a huge fan of Sophie and her work, and have been following her account Catcalls of NYC since I think either 2017 or 2018. So it's been a while. So needless to say, it is an absolute pleasure to have her on today. Alrighty, well, thank you so much, Sophie, for being on with me. It's a pleasure to have you.
Of course, thanks so much for having me.
I'm so glad we were able to get you on. I've been a fan of Catcalls for NYC for I think since 2017. So it is a joy to have you on.
Oh my gosh, you're a really early follower then if you have been following it since 2017. I started it in 2016, so that's impressive.
Well, I'll just go ahead and I'll dive into our first question.
Perfect.
Do you have any unique ethical principles that guide your work with the account and your organization?
That is a very good question. That's not normally one that I get. It's nice to have something that's a little different. Unique ethical principles. I mean, I guess in general, the principles that both Catcalls of NYC and also Chalk Back, which is the global organization run by, are intersectional feminism and everything that comes with that. So for us, that really means centering voices that have been pushed to the margins and making sure that as we're raising awareness about gender-based street harassment, we're also thinking about ability, race, ethnicity, and all of the other identities that impact how people face street harassment. So that's a really central thing in terms of how we frame the conversations we have.
Yeah, I think that's so important too, especially with the work you do and the different locations even, with the Chalk Back organization. So that's really I think having that sort of principle is super strong, of course, and your work proves that it's reached far and wide. So I will go ahead and dive into our next question. What problems do you notice in activist and activism spaces, and what can we as sort of a community do to work to fix them?
That's another really good question. I would say the main problem that I notice in activist spaces is that everyone who I'm working with is really burnt out and probably struggling with their mental health. So I think this is a huge problem for all activists, and it's definitely something that I've noticed with Catcalls of NYC and Chalk Back, that as we're addressing these really difficult problems, as we're hearing so many stories of street harassment and how it impacts people, it can really take a toll on our own mental health. It can make us burn out so that we're not able to continue our work and make it sustainable. So I would say that's one of the central problems that I've noticed within Catcalls of NYC and Chalk Back and the activism we're all doing. What can we do about that? I mean, I think in general, realizing that these are really big structural problems and they're not going to change overnight. So we need to figure out ways to make our work sustainable for ourselves. Find joy in the process, find community and solidarity. So within Catcalls of NYC and Chalk Back, something that's really important for us is just checking in on each other, making sure that we're doing things that are fun and joyful, in addition to obviously confronting the really harmful reality of gender-based harassment and gender-based violence. So I think in general, finding community and solidarity is a really important part of activism and continuing to make it sustainable.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I did work, something that I'm really passionate about myself is gun control and like anti-gun violence legislation. And I have found, especially like things that are just so serious and so detrimental to society, like street harassment, like gender-based violence, like gun violence. It really does, if you don't take that time to, and if you don't have a good supportive environment, it does take a sort of toll on you, which is just really like, it's almost, you're just putting so much of yourself out and like that positiveness out, that when you go to, you know, just have some time for yourself, it's difficult. So that's just something I think that like we as a community, anyone being an activist for anything, it should just definitely like work on community and, you know, like building that place where you can come and just sort of reflect at the end of the day, like away from all these terrible things, which of course we all want to stay super, super mindful of and aware of everything that's going on, but just also just taking some personal time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's really hard with social media too, because it feels like there's a constant stream of information and we're always trying to be aware and learn more and be active and be posting and creating content. So I think that also creates an environment where it's hard to take that step back and relax and practice self-care. So definitely, I agree with you completely.
Awesome. And I'll move on to our third question. What's been your favorite part or most like rewarding in your eyes part of being involved and founding Catcalls of NYC?
Yeah, that's a hard question because there are so many parts of it that I love. But I think the first thing that comes to mind is definitely speaking to students. So I've been lucky that through Catcalls of NYC and Chalk Back, I've had the opportunity to speak to young people about the project and explain what it is, how I've started it, why street harassment is harmful. And in those spaces, when I'm speaking to students, I feel like I have such a huge impact because I notice that people who are facing street harassment in general, young women and folks in the LGBTQ plus community, will say that they didn't even know this was a problem, or especially in New York, I've had girls tell me that they've been flashed on the subway and they've seen men masturbating on the subway, and they thought it was normal. They thought this was like a part of living in New York. They didn't realize it counted as sexual harassment and street harassment. They thought these passing comments were kind of just a part of life. So being able to explain that this is a part of street harassment, this is a harmful behavior, they're not overreacting to think that it's wrong or uncomfortable, that's been extremely rewarding. Because I feel like I'm making an impact in their lives. I'm making them see that this behavior is wrong and allowing them a space to vent about what's happened and also use their experiences to continue fighting back against it and raising awareness. So I think that's always really inspiring, seeing how I can teach younger people that this is a problem that we need to continue to rally against, because it is still so normalized. I mean, also people who don't face street harassment, young people who don't face street harassment will sometimes say, it's great to know about this problem. I hadn't experienced it. And now I feel like I can do something or check in on my peers who are experiencing it. And that also feels really impactful. Yeah, because it feels like young people can then maybe finally end this behavior.
Yeah, I know, like just finding your account at the age that I did, I think like I would go for bike rides every day when I was in 8th grade after school. And there was just something I did. And, you know, like I got to the age where even if I went out in the baggiest t-shirt I owned and the baggiest shorts, I made myself look as, in my eyes, like anti-feminine as like possible. And I'd still like, you know, there'd be the grown man that calls at me or the group of teenage boys that calls at me. And I think like seeing just the community from an account like yours, and, you know, especially when people your own age will like, you know, yell at you or call at you. I feel like we're so conditioned to think that that's complimentary. And that is something to, oh, like you want that. They want you. And it's just like, it's accounts like yours and just communities like Chalk Back that, you know, provide this space for young girls, especially like adolescents and people facing street harassment, not just girls, everyone, but providing the space to be like, no, like that's not okay. That's not something that you can feel uncomfortable, and like you are so valid to feel uncomfortable, because that's not something that anyone should be comfortable about. And it's just so like validating to find a space like that. So your work is not going unnoticed.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for saying that. Yeah, I think that especially when it's verbal harassment, something like street harassment, it's often downplayed so much or belittled, and people don't take it seriously because they'll say it's just words, or it's a compliment, or she was asking for it, all sorts of like harmful and problematic stuff like that. So to be able to just like prove to people that that's not true, it's more than just words, it has this impact, and also to show people that it's connected to other forms of gender-based violence and harassment, I think is really validating for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you want to see, I know we have a huge mayoral race going on in New York right now. How do you want to see the next mayor of New York City respond to sexual harassment and street harassment?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So I would say something that's always been really important to me and the whole Catcalls of NYC community is to have an intersectional feminist approach to ending street harassment. So for us, that means raising awareness about street harassment, educating far and wide about the problem, but not policing or cracking down on street harassment by engaging law enforcement or the NYPD, because the NYPD is extremely violent and harmful towards Black and Brown communities in New York City. So that's always been something that we're very vocal about, just making sure that the solution doesn't harm populations in New York City, while also raising awareness and educating about the problem. So in terms of what we want to see the next mayor do with street harassment, I think just amplifying our efforts and all of the grassroots efforts that are going on in New York City already about sexual harassment and street harassment would be really powerful. I know for Catcalls of NYC and other grassroots groups, funding is really important. So just making sure that groups in New York City who are raising awareness and educating about street harassment have the funding and the resources to continue the impactful work they're doing, both supporting survivors of street harassment and also educating people who don't face street harassment or who are involved in harassing. Really supporting and amplifying that work is the best thing that the mayor of New York, the new mayor of New York, could do.
Yeah, and do you feel like right now, Mayor DeBlasio isn't doing enough, or there could be like different efforts from his team and his council?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I should also say this isn't completely my strength. We're very involved in like the chalk art side of things and the social media side of things and advocating for people in that way, but we haven't yet breached the realm of like talking to our local politicians. So just to preface everything I say with that. But yeah, I mean, I think that street harassment is so overlooked by local politicians in New York, including Mayor de Blasio, and I don't think there have been significant efforts made specifically around street harassment and verbal harassment, which is such a big problem and so much of so many people's experience living in New York. So yeah, I don't think there's been enough attention paid to that. Also, just a side note, everyone who is volunteering with Catcalls of NYC has faced some sort of censorship or harassment from passersby or authorities in New York or police. So it feels like there's a lot of resistance to our work from authorities in New York. So I definitely think that, leadership could play a better role and help us do our job more of advocating for this problem.
I totally, and when you said that you've your team has faced censorship, that definitely brought to mind the fact that we're conditioned, and people facing this harassment are conditioned to think that this is, it's not serious. You just brush it off. You keep on walking. You don't pay attention to it. And then when you see it written in words in a colorful chalk on the street, when there are children by and, people going day to day, and suddenly that's too much, that we can't have that. and like now it's a problem that you're bringing attention to it. So I like, just when you said that, that brought that to mind.
Yeah, it's so ironic that we probably get more attention from law enforcement and from authorities because we're writing in chalk than anyone who's actually harassing someone on the street or a really bad situation that's happening. So there's a lot of attention paid to the chalk and the words that we write on the ground, but not a lot of attention paid to street harassment and various forms of activism against it, and how we can improve the situation.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's just so important about like raising awareness and combating harassment. It's not physical. Like, it's not something that somebody, you know, may touch you or, you know, break your barrier, like your physical barrier, which is just so, what in my eyes makes it just such a unique problem that is, and, you know, maybe is part of the reason why people just aren't super sure on how exactly to combat it. And I think you guys just like putting it down in a physical a physical message is just so like, wow.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that is definitely part of the problem, that it is verbal, and that's why people are able to downplay it so much. But then also when you see the words, you see that it's more than just words because it has such a big impact. A lot of the things will even include threats of violence or other really harmful and aggressive things. Also, people facing street harassment, even when it is just words, there might be a fear that it could escalate to physical violence or following or something more, more physical. So I think that's an important part to mention too.
Yeah, and how do you think like young people, because I know a lot of the people messaging into Catcalls of NYC are young, are students, whether they be in like middle school, high school, or college, messaging in about harassment that they face. How do you think that maybe families or just communities in general, schools, can go about raising awareness and eventually working to end totally street harassment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that also brings me back to my first experience of street harassment and thinking about how my family reacted. And I think this is a really common response. So after I faced street harassment walking down the street when I was 15 and I was very confused and upset, and I told my parents, they just told me to ignore it and that it happens. And then my dad told me that I could change what I was wearing and cover up, kind of like you were saying. There's this idea that people who face street harassment can somehow change what they're wearing or change their, walking routes or whatever it is. So that's how to not respond. Don't respond like that. But that is really common. I think there's a lot of victim blaming and there are lots of harmful narratives around what people facing harassment should be doing or can be doing to prevent it. So I think in general, schools and families and communities should be stressing that street harassment is not acceptable and that everyone should be looking out for each other on the streets, and preventing this from happening as much as possible. I think one major way to prevent street harassment is by teaching people about harmful gender norms and how that impacts everyone in a negative way. I think schools are a really important part of the puzzle, just teaching young people that, for example, a young boy objectifying or sexualizing a young woman is not cool. It's not a good thing, because I think a lot of messages that young people get are really harmful and damaging in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I can agree. And I think that everyone who has ever been a middle school or high school aged, like femme presenting person can also attest to that, and just working to denormalize objectification, and just like even things like teasing because you like somebody, or just things that aren't the case, that aren't right, and are going to have a negative effect eventually in students' lives.
Yeah, no, definitely. I even remember when I was like in middle school and high school, I was taught that it was cool to be objectified. So I even participated in it myself because I thought oh, that means I'm like more popular, or that's a good thing to be sexualized in this way. So I think it's really interesting how it's ingrained in everyone's minds too. And it can be like internalized.
Yeah, definitely. And that just, I think that like to tie it back around to like carry it back, just the work that Catcalls of NYC and Chalk Back. How do you know how many different branches of the Chalk Back organization there are?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact number off the top of my head. We do have a spreadsheet with all of the accounts. It's about 160 active accounts around the world.
That's amazing.
Yeah, on 6 continents and about 49 countries. So it's really widespread. And there are new people asking to start accounts all the time. So it's a movement that's growing really quickly, which is very exciting.
That is, and just, you know, seeing different communities acknowledge the toxicity behind this is something that, you know, I am so glad for. You must be so glad for. So that's amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, I didn't even ask where you're based. Are you in New York also?
I'm actually in Tampa, Florida.
Okay, cool. I don't know if we have an account, Catcalls of Tampa.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly in the city. I'm a little north of it, but definitely if I was in the city, I would 100% be creating Catcalls of Tampa.
Amazing. Well, maybe someday soon someone there will pick it up.
Hopefully I'll reach out. But Sophie, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a joy to have you and just sit down and talk about things that aren't really talked about, and that you guys are writing in chalk all over the world. And so that means just so much.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun to talk this stuff through. Yeah.
Of course. And where can our listeners and viewers find you guys?
So mainly on Instagram, you can go to Catcalls of NYC and also chalkback.org, where you can find the global accounts around the world. We're starting to use TikTok too. So do check out Catcalls of NYC on TikTok. We're trying to build a following there, and also chalkback.org on TikTok. And yeah, that's where you'll find most of our work.
Awesome. Again, it's been a real joy to have you, Sophie. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Of course. Thank you. I have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.
Alrighty. Bye, everyone.